Hey everyone, Coach Micah here, and welcome back to the channel. I recently had the opportunity to visit one of the local speech and debate tournaments in my area, shout out to Espresso Cup in Washington, and judge several rounds of LD. Now, my goal was to scout out some of the arguments and to see the strategies that students are using with regards to this third and final resolution. And let's just say that I have some thoughts. But before we get into that though, if you find these videos helpful and this content helpful, then I would totally recommend hitting that like button and of course subscribing to the channel. I produce both speech and debate content, and I'm really ramping up my preparation for the national tournament, which is just over a month away at the time of recording and hopefully you watching this video. I will continue to be posting content leading up to that tournament, analyzing different aspects of both speech and debate events. So make sure you don't miss any of those videos. And if you're the type of person to skip YouTube, and I can totally understand why, then go ahead and check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the description. I post the same amount of content when in regards to my videos there, but I also give you different resources, different documents, and other things that will be helpful to your debate career. So make sure you check out my Patreon page. With all that said, let's get back to the video. Now, it took me a few days to try to figure out how I can condense all of the thoughts I had about this tournament into a video like this, especially because there was a lot that happened at the tournament. And from what I saw, the primary problem was with the affirmatives, and this couldn't have been truer in out rounds where the negatives won the majority of the ballots. In fact, the negative side won the tournament. And I think that's a testament to just how problematic the affirmative cases are, or the things that they're not doing. So while I could create an entire hour-long, 2-hour-long video, maybe even a whole podcast series about how and why the arguments on both sides fell apart, I'm going to be focusing on the affirmative side of today's debate round. Now, this video is not to say that the debaters who made these arguments are not talented. Of course, there was a lot of talent in the tournament. Not everyone has a great round every single round, but there was talent across the board. When it comes to the state of Lincoln Douglas and the arguments that debaters are making, my goal as a coach is to take the line of thinking that I know you have and develop it into something that is really strong and persuasive and not merely just grasping at straws or things like that. So if you made any of the arguments that I'm about to explain, don't feel bad, but rather take this as an opportunity to figure out how we can get better and develop them into something that is stronger, because I want you as the affirmative to win, and I want you as the negative to win. So the ideas that I have for this video are actually going to be condensed down into 3 different ones. So let's get to the first one. The first problem I noticed with almost all the affirmative cases and the strategies was actually just the lack of true conflict. Now, I noticed that a key part of the resolution wasn't really mentioned in the constructives, and it wasn't brought through into the rest of the speeches, and very few times was actually made a significant part of the debate. The phrase "should be valued over" is really important for both the affirmative and negative side, and the affirmative needs to communicate what this looks like to the judge. But here is what I notice happened a lot. Here's what I have noticed happen a lot. The first element of the lack of conflict came down to the fact that affirmatives were not bringing up any points of resolutional analysis. Why is that a problem? Well, the affirmative has the ability and the advantage to define the round in a way that is helpful to them. Now, of course, some affirmatives do this in a way that is unhelpful, counterproductive, or very rarely unfair. More so, it's just unrealistic. But the affirmatives I saw did not have a resolutional analysis point. They did not take the opportunity to define or narrow the resolution down in a way that showed true conflict. So what does conflict actually look like? How do we value skills over knowledge? And if they did have a resolutional analysis point, they didn't actually explain anything. The affirmative would point out that the resolution is not mutually exclusive, and they don't argue for a complete sacrifice, that you have to have some sort of conflict, but it's not a majority of the time. Yet they wouldn't actually explain what that needed conflict was. And I was actually able to watch this take place in a semifinal round that I watched with some of my students. I did not judge that round. And I noticed that the affirmative mentioned that we needed conflict, but it was actually the negative who determined what that conflict was. And the affirmative was never able to recover from that. The negative side ended up winning that round on a 4-1 decision. And I had the opportunity to speak with him and say that if he were to break, which he did, and if he were to get to the finals round, and if he were to go neg, which he did, that he would want to make sure that he disagrees with the opponent's framework, and if the affirmative does not bring up any point of resolutional analysis, that he would bring it up and prove why his negative analysis, or the conflict that he defines as negative, should win. Which I'm told is what he did, and he ended up winning on a 5-4 decision and winning the tournament. Negative side won the tournament. And let's just say that the affirmative, and there was another round where I judged, had a resolutional analysis point, and they had the explanation what the conflict is. They didn't actually justify it. So when you narrow down the resolution, you are putting a lens on, and you have to tell the judge why that particular lens is the best lens. Why should the judge believe you, and use that lens to look at the round? The affirmatives I saw that did have a resolutional analysis point, that did explain what the conflict was, did not justify it. And the negative side was able to create a response. We'll get into another video, because at the end of the day, a lot of the negatives did not do this. They did not the conflict aspect was not something I saw prevalent in the negative cases. Most of the time, the rounds were decided on other things, because when both sides of the resolution just forget about the framework, or they don't really hold it to that high of importance, the judge has to make decisions on other things in the round. And oftentimes that's the reason why you thought you completely won a round, but the judge didn't vote for you. And that's because you neglected the most important parts of the debate, and your line-by-line responses didn't actually do anything. The judge had to focus on a particular persuasive argument that they heard. So this is why framework is really, really important. If your affirmative constructive does not include a resolutional analysis point, then your case is weak. It just is. I'm sorry. You have to have a point of resolutional analysis that determines what the conflict is. Because skill and theory are valuable in different ways, and we'll look at that more in a second. They're both valuable, and oftentimes you don't have to choose between the two. You can have both, and I think a lot of negatives could do really well with that argument of focusing how important it is not to value skills over theory, how they're both equal and they're both needed. So as the affirmative, you need to have a resolutional analysis that explains what the conflict is. If you don't, your case is weak, because LD is based on framework. The stronger framework that you have, the easier it will be to carry it throughout the round, persuade the judge, and consistently win the judge's ballot. This is another reason why the negatives pretty much swept out rounds. Like it was not even close. The majority of out rounds at Espresso Cup, the negative side won. And it's because the affirmatives did not define conflict. There are a couple other things, though, that the affirmative did not do, and this is where we're going to get into the second point. Another key issue that was plaguing these rounds was actually the lack of clash, or true or significant clash. And by clash, I'm referring to competing arguments within the round that become a deciding factor for the judge. So head to head. You may have ever heard the phrase, ships passing in the night. That's what happens when two cases are both able to exist at the same time and they don't clash. But if two things cannot be true at the same time, that's where we get clash. So there was actually a lack of true clash. But before we analyze this, I want to remind you that it's really important to sift through the round and try to figure out all of the places where you and your opponent agree. In fact, one of the most powerful things you can do as a Lincoln Douglas debater is actually agree with your opponent. What that does is it shows that you're not troubled by the responses or the arguments that your opponents are making, and rather you're finding a creative way to either mitigate, which means to lessen the significance of an argument, or to turn it, meaning to make it look like an argument that supports your side and not your opponent's. Most debaters are not doing this. They're not getting rid of all the places in the debate round where they don't clash so that they can truly focus on where they do clash. In fact, most debaters are just caught up in the weeds and they go line by line and become really disorganized, and then the judge doesn't know who to vote for. Make sure you listen carefully to the arguments and agree with as much as possible, because that will save you time in future rounds. The more you agree, the more time you'll have to disagree on the points that truly matter. But let's look at a few examples of the points that didn't show true or significant clash and ultimately created a he said, she said, or chicken versus the egg problem. Here's what the chicken versus the egg problem looks like. The affirmative builds a case that argues that theory needs to be applied. You need all the good things about theory have to take place because of action. But the negative argues that skills are great, but without guidance, which is theoretical knowledge, then they'll be used for evil or something like that. So in other words, theory needs to be applied, but skills need to be guided. Both sides influence each other. And what this does is it creates an argument that goes round and round and round and round. And you'll notice by my little shrugging character here, this doesn't prove one is more valuable than the other. It proves that they're both valuable for different reasons. One is a guide, one is a foundation, one is the application, the execution. They're both valuable. A lot of the affirmatives and negatives that I've seen proved that their side is valuable, but again, they didn't ever focus on the phrase valued over. They proved that they're significant, but that doesn't ultimately show why it's more significant or significant in a way that makes it more valuable than the other side. And the second was the idea of foundation. This is something I'd heard a lot, kind of a spin-off of the chicken and egg debate. Negative responds by arguing that theory builds the foundation. And the affirmative argues that, well, skills build the society. Right? It's the idea of you can't have a house without having a foundation first. And that is true. But at the same time, a person can't solely just live on a foundation. They have to live in a house, right? Both sides are missing an opportunity to mitigate and simplify the round by explaining that both affirmative and negative are foundational. They're both foundational. They both have unique benefits that make society run smoothly. There is no need to argue that one side is more foundational than the other. And if there is, the affirmative has to prove why that is. The best way to start this is to, again, have a resolutional analysis that shows what conflict is and why it matters. And again, the only other alternative is that the affirmative provides real-world evidence or real-world proof that one side is objectively more foundational than the other. But that is not something I have seen in all the research that I have done so far for this resolution. Third, the lack of significant conflict also came with the idea of sacrifice. So in one breath, the debaters are going to argue that the resolution is not mutually exclusive, which means that we're not completely getting rid or sacrificing one side in favor of the other. Two things can happen at once. You can have both to some degree. So one breath, debaters are arguing, well, we're not completely getting rid of either side in this resolution. But then in the next breath, the affirmative is arguing the horrible applications in a world in which theory is prioritized over skills, because we're going to end up with some type of Nazi Germany due to all the horrible theories that they had, and they should have just focused on bettering people with skills or something like that. And then the negative will come up and argue that, well, the affirmative side is like North Korea. It's a society that's only built on skills, and they have completely demolished all the theory and stuff like that. The strategies a lot of the debaters are going is to show a world where my opponent's side is true, the affirmative side is true, but that world is not a good representation of the resolution. And no affirmative is arguing valued over means completely getting rid of one side or another. So that ultimately means it's basically calling your opponent a Nazi at this point. If you support Hitler, my side supports Hitler, your side supports North Korea, whatever. It's not helpful. We're not sacrificing either side of the resolution. But if there's no resolutional analysis of conflict, that's ultimately what some of the rounds come down to, is just sacrifice, whether or not we should sacrifice. So ultimately, the best strategy for the affirmative is to define the necessary conflict and point out where the true clash lies within the resolution. The affirmative can stay away from being repetitive or dramatic while persuading the judge to fully support practical skills. And there are different ways to do this. In this video, I'm not going to be giving any examples of resolutional analysis points that would truly help, but a tip for you is to figure out what is a good way to determine conflict, right? There are several of them within this particular round. What is a good way that we can actually quantify and measure choosing one over the other? Because that's another thing I saw. I saw a lot of 60-40% arguments. My side is 60%, my opponent's side is 40%, 51%, 49%. Percentages don't matter when the resolution is not inherently transactional or tangible, excuse me. The 60-40% are anything that is quantifiable mathematically doesn't make sense when you have theoretical knowledge, for example, because how do you quantify knowing theory, right? So you have to show conflict in a way that's other than just math. What does it actually look like on a daily basis to choose to value something over something else? And this is where we get into the third problem with the affirmatives, and actually the negatives as well. And that is, I see a lack of comparison. This is one of the things that I will always communicate, and I will add in every single resolutional analysis document that I produce for you guys. And hopefully once we determine the resolutions at Night Talk, I will have written a resolutional analysis document for you for each one. Anyways, all that to say, this resolution is a comparison resolution, which means that the affirmative does not only prove that practical skills uphold the value, but also that theoretical knowledge does not uphold the value. You have to show both. And by doing this, you prove that your side is more valuable, and you prove the other side is less valuable. My side does uphold the value, my opponent's side does not uphold the value. You need to have those two contentions, at least. I'm all for having another contention or two that explain things when it comes to a logical syllogism, but those are the ones you have to have. And the affirmatives simply aren't doing this. So let's go with the first idea of no comparison, right? An incomplete syllogism. The affirmative would create a logical syllogism that shows that, well, practical skills uphold the value. But then they connotate that because practical skills uphold the value, well, that therefore theoretical knowledge does not uphold the value. And unfortunately, that is just not how debate works. Two things can be true at once. Your side can uphold the value, and your opponent's side can also uphold the value. Just by proving that your side upholds the value does not automatically mean your opponent doesn't. And I want to repeat that. Just because your side of the resolution upholds the value does not automatically mean that the negative side doesn't uphold the value. You have to clearly show how either side relates to the value. And of course, you're showing that your side does uphold and your opponent's side does not uphold. So you need to have one contention that focuses on practical skills upholding the value. You're going to uphold this with examples, evidence, logic, reasoning, rhetoric, especially things like that. And your second contention is going to focus on how theoretical knowledge does not achieve the value. And you're going to do the same thing, examples, evidence, logic, rhetoric, etc. And again, the same thing needs to happen on the negative side. Remember, although the burdens are a little bit different, the negative just has to disprove the resolution, and they can do that through several ways. You have to either prove the reverse, meaning my side, theoretical knowledge, upholds the value, and my opponent's side, practical skills, does not uphold the value. Therefore, theoretical knowledge should be valued over practical skills. So that's the reverse of the affirmative. Or you need to show that they're both equal and that they are not, that none of them should be valued over. I've seen debaters add a third option in which all I have to do is prove the negative side does not uphold the value. But I want to bring the sandwich idea back in. If you're in a sandwich competition and your opponent makes a sandwich and you critique that sandwich and you call it ugly and disgusting, but you don't bring your own sandwich, guess who's going to win the competition? Your opponent, because they're the only person who has brought a sandwich. Just because their sandwich is bad, it does not mean that it is worse than what you could have brought up. Who knows? You could have made an even worse sandwich. So no, the negative burden is not to just prove that practical skills don't uphold the value. It has to be equally upheld by both sides, or that your side upholds it better. Simply critiquing the affirmative side does not win the round, because for all the judge knows, your side could be worse. And I think that's another winning strategy that affirmatives do in that particular round, is they just show how there's no advocacy for theoretical knowledge. Practical skills has a lot of problems. Sure, it's not a perfect side of the resolution, but by only pointing that out, you're not actually going to win the round. You have to have a productive argument, a constructive argument to show why theoretical knowledge is good, more good, or equally good than the other side. And the last thing, and I would probably argue that this is one of the worst things that I saw. Not worse in terms of like the debaters are bad people, but worse as in it was just kind of cringy, I guess. It showed a lack of understanding or creativity when it comes to the terms, okay? And that is the idea that you have claims without evidence, okay? So, unfortunately, a lot of the time, the affirmative will make some sort of unsubstantiated claim about reality that just isn't true, okay? So, for example, the affirmative will argue that practical skills uniquely uphold some sort of economic benefit. But they forget, and unfortunately a lot of negatives forget to argue this too, but they forget that many skills require theory, and there are theory-laden skills. If you see in my past video, you'll know this to be true. So affirmative is arguing and running off the idea that only skills can improve the world, or that theoretical knowledge can only benefit the person that holds the knowledge. But they forget that there is influence, right? What you believe or what you know will influence your behavior. And yes, a lot of skills have a foundation in theory. And a person with theoretical knowledge will be able to share that information. People with theoretical knowledge don't just sit there and never speak or never write. They do those things to share knowledge with people. That's how knowledge is passed down. That's how we get ideas, is because people shared them. I heard it multiple times that I think they use the phrase, and although the grammar is incorrect, they use the phrase that theoretical knowledge only benefits the possessor. Possessor is not a word, by the way. It's the person who possesses it. Theoretical knowledge only influences or is only beneficial to the person who has it. But that's not true. Theoretical knowledge improves other people's lives because knowledge is shared and it's spread, right? That's why you get the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, which is a really good saying, by the way, for this round. I'm surprised nobody has used it yet. The pen is mightier than the sword. Theoretical knowledge is mightier than skill. Anyways. The idea here is that, unfortunately, a lot of debaters are getting away with these premises that just aren't true. Make sure you understand what the premise your opponent is making and challenge that premise. This goes back to mitigation, right? If your opponent makes a claim that their side uniquely upholds something, disprove it by showing how your side also upholds that thing. What that does is it lessens the significance of that argument and makes the side less attractive. It's easier to show something is less valuable than it is more valuable. So you're constantly mitigating, right? You're looking out for these things. Now, another aspect of something that I saw within these rounds here is the idea of an oversimplification. Okay, what do I mean by oversimplification? Well, the debaters are actually taking things they assume to be true and applying that in a very too simplified way, or in this case, simplifying something that's incredibly broad. What do I mean by this? They are synonymizing terms. So for example, they're saying that actions equal skills, right? They're saying that the two terms are synonymous and action is a skill. But that's not true. Actions are not automatically skills. Skills can involve actions, but me doing an action does not automatically mean that I have a skill. The same thing goes with knowledge, right? Knowledge and theoretical knowledge are two completely different terms. They mean different things. Knowledge is more general. It just refers to, I think a lot of the phraseology that's going around now is justified true belief. Knowledge is just things that we know. But we can know different things and in different ways, meaning that there are different types of knowledge. That's why we have, or at least the people who wrote this resolution, narrowed it down to theoretical knowledge. They're not saying action should be valued over knowledge. They're saying that practical skills should be valued over theoretical knowledge. That the resolution is already limiting in itself, but a lot of the debaters are trying to undo that. And you just can't. Because theoretical knowledge is not the only type of knowledge. There's also practical knowledge. Practical knowledge being the know-how or understanding the things when it involves direct hands-on experiences. So a lot of the debaters are synonymizing terms that aren't supposed to be, and you should be, as the opponent, pointing this out. Action and skill are not synonymous. Knowledge and theoretical knowledge are not synonymous. The debate should never be about whether it's action versus knowledge. And here's what they try to do. The affirmative tries to show, well, that theory means nothing unless you act upon it. But acting upon a theory is not an example of valuing practical skill, at least not in most situations. And this is actually where I want to show a really important piece of evidence when it comes to the differences between theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. This article is from the LIS Education Network, which many negatives and affirmatives use the definition from the LIS Education Network. I think actually one debater did, rather than just referencing the Library and Information Science Education Network, they actually referenced the author of this particular argument, which I thought was really good. And that's a tip. If you ever have a source, make sure you credit the author if applicable, because the author, especially if they have credentials, will always be more credible than just quoting the source. And of course, it depends on the source, right? But this author actually points out how theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge are different from each other. And again, you've seen the definition. Theoretical knowledge refers to the understanding of concepts, principles, and ideas that are often abstract and not directly related to hands-on experiences. And that last point is really important. Not directly related to hands-on experiences. And I think this is a difference that debaters aren't pointing out. My opponent's side of the resolution doesn't have anything to do with hands-on experiences. My side does. Any knowledge that does have to do with a hands-on experience could be argued that it is practical knowledge, right? But it actually goes much deeper than that. The difference comes in three different ways, according to this article. The first you have is focus. So they argue that theoretical knowledge centers and is focused on understanding concepts and ideas. It emphasizes why and how things happen, exploring the abstract frameworks and models. It provides a broad, generalized understanding of the subject without direct application. So what is the focus? The focus is just gain information. What is your goal? The goal with theoretical knowledge is just to gain the information. I want to understand. I want to know. I want to have the know-how. While practical knowledge, the goal is to use the information, not to have the information. So practical knowledge is about hands-on experiences and skills gained through doing. It focuses on how to accomplish tasks or solve real-world problems. So again, it's about the focus. Theoretical knowledge focuses on just knowing, while practical knowledge focuses on using that information in the real-world situation, in the hands-on experience. There's also a difference in application. So theoretical knowledge is more abstract, it's more academic. It offers a foundation for thinking critically and understanding ideas, but may not always be immediately useful in everyday situations, while practical knowledge is directly applicable to real-world situations. It involves the using of tools, techniques, processes to perform tasks or solve problems and achieve specific outcomes. So applying it, remember, theoretical knowledge applied is understanding. It helps you to think critically. You can use it to create thoughts, right? A thought is not an action. While practical knowledge is created to help you perform, to help you solve a problem or to achieve something. You're trying to achieve something outside of yourself. That's the application of it. And then there's also the difference of acquisition. Theoretical knowledge is gained through education, research, study, reflection. It comes from reading, listening to lectures, or learning directly from experts in their particular field. So it's the acquisition is the learning of it. I'm taking in the information, I'm learning. While practical knowledge is actually acquired through experience, trial and error, and practice. So when I'm doing something, as I'm doing it, I am also learning, but I'm learning in a different way. I am learning from Coach Micah from this video because I'm listening to him talk. But if you were to watch my other video and you would do the drill with me, you would learn how to write a debate case in a practical way because you're actually doing the writing of the debate case. You're putting pen to paper to do the task, right? So that's the difference in acquisition. And I would think this is really important. And again, this shows the nuances of the arguments here. Theoretical and practical knowledge each have strengths and limitations, but combined, they provide a more comprehensive understanding of any field or subject. This is really key for mitigation. Both practical skills and theoretical knowledge, both theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge are important. And oftentimes they go together and you don't separate the two because they are both really, really important. So this is again why you have to show what conflict actually is, why we value one side over the other side. I'm going to link this article because there are so many different nuances here and it shows all the different aspects of theoretical knowledge and practical skill. This article will be linked in the description of this video. Anyways, all that to say, there are too many nuances that both sides of the resolution are missing. Both sides of the resolution are truly focusing, especially the affirmatives, are trying to prove that skills are good, but they're doing so in an insignificant way. They're not actually proving why conflict matters or what it looks like. They're trying to show that skills are more important than theory, which the negative has a much easier time beating, which is why the negatives did so well at the Espresso Cup tournament, and why I imagine the negatives will do well at the coming tournaments before Nighthawk. So that's why I created this video, to help boost the affirmatives. Make sure that you don't fall into the trap of providing no conflict, no clash, or no comparison. You need to have all of those. And as the last few tournaments of the month wrap up this and next week, and I think they'll have another tournament or two, I haven't looked at the calendar, you need to make sure that you work on and shore up your cases, make them as strong as possible, and understand the strategies that your opponents are using. You need to make sure that your arguments are clear, that they're significant, that they are good arguments, strong arguments in and of themselves. You do not need to oversimplify. There is no need to strawman. Creativity is what creates a good debater. A debater who can take an argument and explore it in a way that allows them to be persuasive and speak to the judge, to be the guide. And that's another thing. Obviously, the affirmative has a harder time with only 4 and 3 minute speeches, but you need to be the debater that rises above the weeds and is the guide for the judge. The judge needs to be guided along. Doesn't matter how much experience you've had. The majority, in fact, all judges need to be guided in some way. I am still working on a comprehensive look on how to speak to judges and how to read ballots. That one's taking a little bit more time because there's just notes everywhere. I have been working on that content since I was in Italy back in October. And so I have to filter through all the footage and all that. But all that being said, stay tuned for videos and resources on how to speak to judges. Anyways, if you are not sure where to start or how to improve with what you have, don't hesitate to reach out to me. CoachMikeDiaz@gmail.com. I am open for coaching. I would love to be able to take a look at your cases and show you where you can improve, but also the weak spots. You know, if I were to do a practice debate round, for example, to show you how your opponent might respond or negate the resolution if they're truly strong. Because I want you to prepare as you're debating the strongest debaters possible, because that's what NITALK is going to be. Everyone who is at the national tournament qualified to be there. And while they're not all going to be extremely, extremely good, it is going to be challenging, and you're going to run into new challenges, creative arguments, and judges who have interesting ideas and judging philosophies. So make sure that if you need help, to reach out. I don't want to obviously conflict with your coaching schedule. If you have a coach or coaches, that's great, but at least keep watching these videos, because I am going to be providing raw analysis that will be useful to you. Because remember, your framework, how you argue, your rhetoric, your persuasion, you know, the element to which you persuade, your critical thinking, your responses, those are all things that a coach is not necessarily going to have the end-all be-all of information. It's really important to gain as many perspectives as possible, which is why you should watch my videos. And I want to thank you for watching them as well. As always, if you found this video helpful, I appreciate you making it to this point, of course. Make sure that you stay tuned, because more videos will come out. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I will see you in the next one. Good luck at your tournament. Have a great one.